Hey, Paul here for Retro Gaming Arts, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Psio, and we're going to be mainly doing the switchboard install, and that's pretty much what this video is, but it's for the Psio, which is a little SD card reader thing that goes into the back of your PlayStation. You can install all sorts of games onto it. It's essentially like an EverDrive for your PlayStation, but we're not going to really be going over that. We're mainly just going to be installing the switchboard, which every Psio needs a switchboard installed in order to work, and the Psio only works on PlayStations that have the little expansion port on the back. So with all that being said and out of the way, it's a really sweet product. I'll put a link to where you can buy it in the description. Every PlayStation 1 game on an SD card playing on your actual PlayStation. It's really, really sick. So let's dismantle this PlayStation, break it down to the motherboard, and once we get it down to the motherboard, we're going to then do the install. Now this particular motherboard is a PU18. There's various motherboard revisions, and this is the particular one we're going to be doing. And right here, the first thing we need to do is cut this trace. All the install diagrams are right on the Psio website, and that's exactly what I followed in order to do this install, and I just pretty much filmed it. So you saw how I highlighted the trace that needs to be cut, and now we're cutting it. We're sort of just like using an X-Acto knife razor blade to just sort of like kind of like wiggle cut it. Just because you don't want to actually slice it because you could accidentally cut a trace next to it. So I'm just sort of just wiggling it to sever that trace. By severing that trace, you sever the connection from point A to point B. And now I'm using a multimeter with continuity to double check that trace line to make sure there's no continuity. So now we're going to the second pair of traces that we need to cut, which is right here. And the diagram suggested cutting them right next to the vias, so that's exactly what we're going to be doing. These ones were a little bit, I don't want to say more difficult, but you had to be a little bit more careful because the traces are so close together that you don't want to cut other traces because then you're going to have to jump those with wire, and yeah, just be careful. I was careful. Now, there's other methods you could use instead of cutting it with an actual razor blade, but this is what I do. It works for me. There's better ideas out there, but this is just what I have on hand. So now we have the first trace cut. So now we're going to go and we are going to cut the second trace. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to check with for continuity, and also for these traces to make sure that they're cut. What I like to do is I like to do the cell phone zoom trick, which is I use my cell phone camera and zoom in all the way. But before we do that, we're just going to check for continuity. So since a little bit of the trace is actually exposed, I was actually able to touch it with the meter to see if it was severed, because there's solder mask on top of the trace. So once you scrape away the solder mask, a little bit of the copper is exposed. And from the multimeter continuity check, I was able to confirm that one was completely severed and the other was not. So we're going to take a scratch pen, and this is my biggest flaw of this entire install, was using my worn out scratch pen. I really need to buy a new one. It's completely, I'm all the way at the end. I don't really have any fiberglass left on the scratch pen. So now that I scratched off the solder mask off of that trace, I was able to cut it much easier. And then there we have the severed traces on my cell phone camera, zoomed in 8 times. Now, as I just said, the biggest mistake was not using a good scratch pen. I'll get to that when we go to do the soldering on the next one. But right here, we're going to solder a wire right here, because that's what the install diagram said to do. So we're going to do what the install diagram says, because it was made by the people who made the thing. So that's what we do. So now we're adding flux, and back to where I said my biggest mistake was not using a good scratch pen. And what I mean by that is there's a little bit of solder mask on top of the vias, which we need to solder to right here. And because my scratch pen isn't exactly it's dead, so I wasn't able to fully scratch away all of the solder mask and get the copper to be super bare. So when I was soldering these 30 AWG Kynar wire, because that's the exact wire I use, as you see, the solder kind of only went in the middle of it, and it doesn't actually go all the way around, and it doesn't exactly flow. Like you can see, There's a little bit of solder in there, but it didn't like completely go over the entire thing. It's still strong enough to the point where I can, you know, support the weight of the board by pulling the wire. I can pull the wire up, and it's a secure connection. It's just not a perfect solder joint. So I'm upset about it. This is my first PSIO install board that I've ever done. I've never done this one before, but I've soldered to vias like this numerous times. So I'm upset, but whatever. It ended up working in the end, and I guess I'm okay with it. I'm really not, but whatever. It's fine. I'm going to link a new scratch pen in the description, and I'm going to buy a new scratch pen. There we go. Alright, so you see, like, you can still pick it up, and you still have, it'll still support the weight of the board. So that's actually a really good way when soldering anything to check to see if you have a good solid solder connection is lift up the wire, and if it can support the weight of the board, if your solder joint can support that weight, that's a good one. Like right there, I just tugged the board. You saw it disappear. That was because I pulled it. Supports the weight of the board. You're good. So now we have these 2 more points to install. Now these are actually tapping directly into the parallel I/O port, which is the expansion port where you would normally plug in a Game Shark or other various accessories. So now we got some more vias to solder to. So now we're going back with our busted scratch pen. And it's not really doing that good of a job of scratching off because I'm all the way at the end of the fiberglass. But I was able to make do enough to get the entire install to work. So after I scratch away a little bit of the solder mask, just clean up that. There's like a little bit of, you know, fiberglass particles from the scratch pen. There's a little bit of solder mask particles all over. So you clean that up completely, add flux, and then you add solder and then your wires. Now, these little solder joints, these are very, they're very reminiscent of like PS2 Slims where you solder to the vias. And the regular PS1, the mod chip install, the solder points you solder to are typically a lot larger than these ones. So that's actually a little bit easier of an install. And here we go again. It's like the solder only flows inside the via, but not actually flowing over. So again, on these vias as well, not a perfect solder joint, but enough to support the weight of the board, so it's okay. We'll roll with it. Now right here is power and ground on these 2 little pads that are on the board. So we're soldering power and ground, and then after we do these ones, we are ready to wire them all up to the switchboard. So that's what's about to happen next. And well, I cleaned the everything up with flux, and then I have to decide where I want to put the switchboard. I don't really, like I said, it was my first one, so I kind of had to think about it and kind of like finagle around. But first, let's go and do some wire dressings. This one was lucky; they just sort of kind of flowed in place, and I didn't really have to do anything. Like right there, boom! Like it's already half done. Like just by running my thumb over it, they all lined up into place after the 3 on the top curved like that. And we're gonna tack those wires together with a little bit of super glue after just getting them all a little bit neater. Boom, and that's it. That's all we really needed to do. Now here we go with the switchboard, trying to figure it. And where's the orientation? And I think I settled right there, and that seemed to be okay. So now we're going to do the same thing we do on PS2 installs or the Mega Amp installs if you've seen any of those videos that I made. It's the same exact method that I do for those installs where you solder all the wires to the board first, and then you do the wire dressings, and then you cut, strip, tin, and solder them to the board. In this case is the switchboard. So right here, the reason why I like to do this, I like to do it for like several reasons, but it actually makes everything easier because since I have all my wires lined up in a row, I can then very easily look at like the install diagram and know which wire is which. Even on an install that I've never done before, it was still very easy to look and know which ones are which because they're all in a row. So that part actually makes your life a little bit easier. And then all you have to do is say, okay, so the third wire up is ground. The 4th wire up is power. etc., etc. So as you're going sifting through all the different wires, you know which one's which by glancing at the install diagram. So now right here we're adding flux to the actual switchboard, and then we're actually adding a little bit of solder to the switchboard. And then we're just tinning up all of our points, and then while all of our points are tinned, or once we get all of our points tinned, it's just going to make it a little bit easier for when we actually go to solder in all of the wires. Because all we're going to need to do is cut, strip, and then flow the solder, and then we'll flow the point right under the solder. And I've said this before that I don't really like doing this. I don't know why. It just gives me like a bad feeling in like my stomach. I don't know. Like I feel like I'm doing something wrong. But at the same time, it works and it works well. So it's kind of like, oh well. You know what I mean? Strip it, but when you're working with when you don't have any service loops, it's really hard to have that extra wire to be able to strip, because we're cutting the wires all short and stuff like that. Anyway, at least I fully get the insulation off of the conductor, and I guess I'm okay with it as well. And then, like I said, that's why we added the solder to the board first, so we could just flow it, and then just with our tweezers slide the conductor right into the flowed solder while it's all nice and molten. And it's almost like plugging it in. Works really well. And I actually did this. I skipped the second point. Now I moved on to the third point, and just bend it into place wherever it's gonna go. Cut it, just like cut it right beyond the path of the pad. Strip it or burn off the insulation. And that's why I like to round the insulation off, because it burns it really, really well. And then every time pretty much the iron goes off screen, I'm dipping it into some steel wool to clean it, or to get anything that's on the iron off of it. And then just heat up the pad, slide it in. That's just what we're doing. This was a pretty fun install to do. I enjoyed doing this one. Although I think I enjoy doing any sort of install that's Sony related, because I don't know, I guess those are my favorite systems. I'm pretty sure they are. They are. I guess those are the ones I like. Get that solder joint right nice like that. And we're just finishing up. We got a couple more points, but it's the same thing. It's doing the same thing over and over. And on this one, I actually burned off a little too much insulation. So I'm going to go and snip the conductor down to make it nice and short, so there is an excess. And actually, it's funny, when I snipped off the conductor, it fell right there, so we remove it with our tweezers. I don't know if I advocate tweezers enough, or point out the fact of how much tweezers are awesome, but I use tweezers for pretty much literally every single install that I do. I can't say tweezers save my life. I don't know, do you use tweezers? Are you a modder? How much do you mod? What do you mod? Do you like to mod? Tell me in the comments. I don't know who's watching. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Do you use tweezers? I use tweezers. I like them. I don't know, I don't know if that's just me, but actually I did advocate for tweezers. If you watch my PS3 LED controller mod, I'm pretty sure I advocated tweezers in that one. So here's what we have so far for the install. And now we have these two final points down here to do. And once we get those ones, it's said on the PSIO website, if you do your switchboard install and it works with regular PS1 games, that's how you know the install went good, and that's how you know to go forward, and you can actually install the firmware onto the PSIO itself. So that's what we're going to be doing right after we do these two little points, is to make sure that it boots right, it works normal, to make sure it still works. And man, getting this thing after, I didn't put this in part of the video because this video is clearly focused on the switchboard install and showing what that looks like, but getting this thing to actually up and run, you had to enter in the serial number, you had to enter in your order number, you had to enter in all this stuff on their website to be able to download the firmware or something like that. And then once you get it downloaded and installed, it's really simple from then on. Right after that, it's very, very easy. But tracking down that order number through a million emails, oh my god. That was probably the hardest part of this entire thing, was finding the email. And I don't care, email search function doesn't work that well. It does, but not really. Alright, so there we go, last solder joint, and we're going to clean up all the excess flux over it, and that's it. The Psio Switchboard is now installed. Oh, what it also said on their website was make sure you don't have any continuity between power and ground, because if you do and you fire it up, big problems can happen. So I just did a little continuity check on power and ground, made sure there was nothing, and here's the final install. Here it is. Pretty sweet mod. Very happy that these full-blown, like, really smart engineers are coming up with these awesome things for PS1, because PS1 is an awesome console. It's my personal favorite, even though I was saying earlier how I don't know if it's my favorite. It's definitely my favorite console. And it boots up a PS1 game, so that means we're good. That means we're good. Switchboard install went okay, and we can proceed to installing all the firmware and all the games onto the thing after one final touch, and that is this little sticker that lets you know that the switchboard's installed. They really went all out, this company. I give them props. They did a good job with all of this. So thank you guys very, very much for watching. Thank you for checking out all my other videos. I hope you enjoyed watching this, and I'll see you guys next time. And here's a bonus video to thank you for watching my entire video, because that means a lot to me when people do that, because I really like making these videos, and I put a lot of effort into them because it's a lot of fun. And so when somebody watches like the whole thing, it really means a lot, in addition to like everything else that you guys do. So here's a little LED mod for the same PlayStation. It's just a quick little desolder, you know, pop some desoldering off. Very good entry level. If you're, I don't know how, like I said, I don't know how much people mod, or like what you guys mod or anything like that, because you got a comment to tell me. But this is great if you're like just getting into it. Like, this is the best thing to do to start out learning how to mod, is just LED. If there's an LED in it, change it. It's great. It's great practice for desoldering and soldering. And then don't forget your flux, because we fluxed that up. And we're just going to add a little bit of solder right here. And then we're just going to flow it into place, and it's going to be all super, super nice. Bonus video. Thank you guys. Thank you guys very much for everything. All the support is unreal. It really means a lot to me. Bonus video. Yeah, bonus video. Clean it up. I don't even know what color LED that was. I just picked one at random. Whatever. It looks cool. I like it. Thank you guys again very, very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.